Someone took your place, and somehow nothing about it ever felt quite right for them. That's the thing nobody warns you about. Being replaced doesn't destroy you from the inside out. It destroys them from the inside out, slowly, quietly, in ways they never saw coming. Because when someone new walks into the space you used to fill, they bring everything except the one thing that actually mattered. They bring themselves, but they can't bring you. And here's the question that lives in your chest long after it's over. Were you really that easy to forget? Or were you so much more than they understood? Let's talk about what actually happens. Not the version people post about, not the highlight reel they want you to believe. The real version, the one that unfolds in private, in silence, in all the moments they didn't expect to miss you. This is Psychology Wisdom, and today we're going into the psychology of what it truly means to be replaced, and why the people who replace you almost always end up feeling something they never planned to feel. Because the story doesn't end when they move on. That's actually where it begins. From a distance, it looks effortless. They found someone new, they're laughing in photos, they seem lighter, freer, like whoever you were to them has already dissolved into the past. And if you only had the surface to judge, you'd think the transition was seamless, clean, final. But psychology tells us something different. What looks like healing from the outside is often something else entirely underneath. There's a well-documented pattern in human behavior called emotional substitution, the tendency to fill the void left by a meaningful connection with something new. Not because we've resolved the loss, but because sitting with it feels unbearable. It's not moving forward. It's moving away. Away from stillness, away from grief, away from the discomfort of admitting what was actually lost. You can replace a person, you cannot replace what they made you feel. So when someone moves on quickly, when they seem to slot someone new into your old role with remarkable efficiency, it often says less about how little you meant, and far more about how much they needed to not feel it. The speed of replacement isn't a measure of your value, it's a measure of their avoidance. But avoidance, as it turns out, has a shelf life, and when it expires, everything changes. The first few weeks feel promising. There's that newness, that electric, slightly nervous energy that comes with any unfamiliar connection. Conversations feel fresh, there's curiosity, there's a sense of possibility. And for a while, that momentum carries things forward in a way that feels almost convincing. But somewhere around the point when the novelty settles, when the newness wears off and the ordinary moments begin, something starts to shift. It's not dramatic, it doesn't arrive all at once. It sneaks in through the side door. Maybe it's a conversation that stays shallow no matter how hard they try to go deeper. Maybe it's a moment of silence that feels awkward instead of comfortable. Maybe they reach for understanding and find that the person beside them is trying, genuinely trying, but can't quite get there. And in those quiet gaps, something stirs. Not a name, not a memory, a feeling. Psychologists call this implicit comparison, the unconscious measuring of a current experience against a prior one. We don't always mean to do it. But when a relationship was genuinely rare, the brain holds on to the emotional fingerprint of it. And when something doesn't match, it notices, quietly, persistently. This is where the questions start forming, even when they don't want to ask them. Why does this feel like work? Why do I have to explain things I never had to explain before? Why does the comfort feel borrowed instead of real? They push the questions aside. They tell themselves it's just adjustment, just the newness fading, just a phase. But the questions don't go anywhere. Some silences are peaceful, others are just the sound of something missing. And then comes the moment that changes everything. It rarely arrives as a revelation. It tends to arrive as an accumulation. All those small, ignored feelings finally reaching a weight the mind can no longer dismiss. The comparison that was once unconscious becomes entirely conscious. They start to see it clearly now, and seeing it clearly is the part they can't undo. It's not that what they have now is bad. It might even be good by most conventional measures, but good is not the same as right, and familiar is not the same as real. And that's the realization that begins to settle in. Not all at once, but layer by layer, the way understanding usually works. What they had with you wasn't just chemistry or timing or circumstance. It was a specific kind of ease, the kind where you don't have to perform, the kind where you don't have to shrink or expand to fit, the kind that only exists between two people who genuinely see each other. And what they're experiencing now, for all its surface-level similarity, doesn't have that. They begin to understand, on a level below conscious thought, that what you gave them wasn't a role someone else could step into. It was a texture that only you carried. And now that it's gone, the difference is undeniable. This is the moment they stop looking forward and start looking back. And the weight of that shift surprises them. Regret is an unusual emotion. It doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly in the corner of ordinary moments, in the middle of a conversation that doesn't land, in the hollow feeling after an evening that should have felt satisfying but didn't, in the 2 a.m. thoughts they don't share with anyone. And regret has a particular shape when it involves someone you undervalued while you had them. They start thinking about you differently now, not with the convenience of distance, not with the version of you they constructed to make leaving feel easier. They start thinking about who you actually were, how you actually showed up, the specific, unrepeatable things you brought that no one else has come close to replicating, the way you held space for them without needing to be asked, the way you understood them without requiring a full explanation, the way things with you had a quality of ease that they've been chasing ever since and still haven't found. Psychologically, this is called retrospective idealization, combined with experiential comparison. And it's one of the most emotionally destabilizing combinations a person can experience. Because now they're not just missing you in the abstract, they're missing specific, irreplaceable things about you. And they're watching those things be absent in real time, every single day. And the thought they've been running from finally catches up to them. Maybe this was a mistake. They try to dismiss it. They call it nostalgia. They tell themselves they're romanticizing the past. But the thought keeps returning. Because it's not nostalgia, it's recognition. The recognition that what they lost wasn't ordinary. And ordinary is exactly what they've ended up with in its place. Here's the hardest truth of all. The hardest truth isn't that they replaced you. It's that they tried and discovered it was impossible. Not because no one else is worthy, not because connection can't be found again, but because what you specifically offered was built from you, from who you are at the core, and that is, by its very nature, irreplaceable. You weren't just a presence in their life. You were a kind of atmosphere, the way conversations with you moved, the way problems felt smaller in your company, the way they never had to be anyone other than exactly who they were. These weren't things that could be listed in a profile or asked for in someone new. They were things you brought without trying, naturally, instinctively, because that's who you are. And now, I'm standing beside someone who is making every effort, who is genuinely good and genuinely trying. They feel it, the absence, the specific gravity of what you were that cannot be manufactured or found or summoned by wanting it badly enough. Real connection isn't transferable. It's built between two specific people, and it can't be rebuilt with different materials. This is what the psychology of irreplaceable connection tells us. The people who leave us sometimes do so believing they can find what they had anywhere. They believe connection is abundant, that it flows easily, that the next person will simply step up and match what was lost. And then they discover, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once, that it doesn't work that way. And by the time they fully understand this, you've already begun to change, not because you planned to, but because time and distance have a way of shifting things. You've started building a life that doesn't include waiting for them. You've started choosing yourself, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because you finally understand your own value clearly enough to stop placing it in someone else's hands. And that's the part they never anticipated, that while they were learning what they lost, you were becoming someone even more beyond what they remembered. Because here's what replacing someone actually reveals. It reveals the one who was replaced was never the problem. The one doing the replacing was the one who didn't understand what they had. So if you've ever felt the sting of being set aside, of watching someone walk away and move on like you were a chapter they could simply close, hear this clearly. Your presence was not generic. Your value was not common. The connection you gave was not something that comes along in every relationship. And the clearest proof of that? The fact that nothing they found felt the same. They can fill the space. They cannot fill the feeling. If this spoke to something in you today, take a moment to like this video. It helps Psychology Wisdom reach more people who need to hear exactly this. Share it with someone who's been questioning their worth after being replaced. Because sometimes the most powerful reminder is knowing that your value was never actually in question. Only their ability to recognize it.